into chapter 21 of Exodus. We're going to pick up in verse 22, and we're going to see how far we can make it into 22. So we're going to go 21, verse 22, and into chapter 22. Discuss it, as we always do, and then we're going to take a pause from Exodus for a little while, and Aaron's going to bring us back into Acts for a period of time in our Sunday school, and then we'll get back to Exodus. But I need a little break from teaching, and I figured it would be good to change it up and keep our minds stirred up and agitated with something new. And I had hoped, hope springs eternal. I had hoped that we would get to the end of get to the end of chapter 23, and it's kind of a natural breaking point somewhere around 24, 23, 24, but we'll make it as far as we can, and it is what it is. So, sound good? Any comments or thoughts on what we talked about last week? If you can even remember that far back, past all the turkey, past all the stuffing, and the meeting with family, if your brain could even recall last Sunday. What's that? So, those of you, maybe moms who felt compelled to put on a big meal, maybe you related to it. We were talking about slavery. Maybe the holiday season, you're like, this applies. And we saw the rules in the law concerning slavery. Did anything jump out at you guys? Or there were some really great observations made by y'all last week. What did we see in the laws on slavery?
There's one thing we didn't talk about concerning slavery. I just want to bring that up.
Yeah, please.
There are some fellowships, some churches, and I think there may be a good application around the topic of the addressing of slaves, that what's taking the place of that today, and I don't agree with this, but I've heard it, is that this is taking the topic of the addressing of workers. Guys who are employers,
Yeah.
I don't think obviously there's something that work, but there may be a few rules that do throughout school.
Yeah, and I think we see that a lot applied when it comes to like Ephesians, right? When they talk about, Paul is giving instruction to the church, and he's going through the different social relationships, just as we see in the text here, and he says, and servants to masters, and I've probably taught that myself, that we can see how an employee should relate to his employer. And I did notice something in the text along these lines that I think maybe sticks a pin in that balloon, lets some of the air out, is oh man, I was gonna underline this. But there's a note in here referencing the wages of workers, and he separates them and talks about how there was one instance where you will treat a slave as a paid worker, and give him his wages. And so you see that even at this point in time, there was the concept of, paid employees and indentured servants. And what were some of the real stark differences we saw in this relationship between slaves and their masters, and say even, a modern day employer-employee relationship, or even maybe a couple hundred years ago, would have been different? Any differences that you see between this relationship?
I don't want to use the word blossom, but the idea of employees has changed so much, and let's just say the last 20 years.
Yeah.
How we are able to treat them with things we have to be cautious about legally.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we say to them things that we made them do that we didn't have to think about, maybe because of the problem 20 years ago. But also there are things that come up politically that are unfortunate.
Yeah. And namely, as it regards the text, I mean, even your parents, your grandparents had free agency. You know, they could work for an employer, and if that did not work out or the employer had to let them go, they could go work for another employer. Aside from providing for them, it didn't affect the wife and the children. And, you know, employers did not give wives to their employees, you know, or take a, you know, that was not, even Henry Ford didn't do that. So,
Could they protest and say, no, I've got them already? Probably not.
probably not. You're right, exactly. And what was the big parallel that we drew between the slave, well, with the slaves? What was the big comparison we made? What did we see in that relationship a picture of? Jesus. Jesus. This picture of Jesus as a slave to the master, a good master, who's pierced just like the slave was, for us, his bride, his children. And the commentator also went on to say how, in a sense, we see Christ as the forever slave to God's will on our behalf. And we see the willing slave who says, I love my master, I love my wife, I love my children, and I will go through this for them. And
Paul calls himself that.
yeah.
And there are some who would say, well, wait, well, that's a servant. There are other words in Scripture that are cloud or servant. The doulos is specifically legal slave. That word. So we have this women's slave association that we have with Christ. It's a wonderful relationship. And it's also kept like that.
It is. What is the slave's reward for staying with his master? It's not expressly written in the text, but it is implied. What's his reward?
Well, if he leaves having gained a wife and children later,
Right. And his reward, his given family is his reward. And he gets to continue in a relationship with the master, the good master, which is worth noting. Also, did you notice in the structure of these laws how women are protected? Wives are not left destitute. Children are not left destitute. Definitely there's something in there that to the modern mind maybe makes us recoil a little bit. We're like, oh, you know. But you really get the sense that it is the master's responsibility and it is the father's responsibility to provide for his daughter a good husband and to be steward over that. It's worth noting. We're going to get into that a little bit more as we get into the text. So, unless somebody had something else they wanted to jump into, I would like to read verse 22 down through the end of the chapter, or down to verse down to the end of the chapter. We'll talk a little bit, and then I'll look for volunteers to keep reading. Sound good? All right. Verse 22. When men strive together and hit a pregnant woman, so that her children come out, but there is no harm, the one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall impose on him, and he shall pay as the judge determines. But if there is harm, you shall pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. When a man strikes the eye of his slave, male or female, and destroys it, he shall let the slave go free because of his eye. If he knocks out the tooth of his slave, male or female, he shall let the slave go free because of his tooth. When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten. But the owner of the ox shall not be liable. But if the ox has been accustomed to gore in the past, and its owner has been warned but has not kept it in, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner shall also be put to death. If a ransom is imposed on him, then he shall give for the redemption of his life whatever is imposed on him. If it gores a man's son or daughter, he shall be dealt with according to the same rule. If the ox gores a slave, male or female, the owner shall give to the master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. Notice what the price of a slave's life is. Just underline that. When a man opens a pit, or when a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restoration. He shall give money to its owner, and the dead beast shall be his. When one man's ox butts another so that it dies, and they shall sell the live ox and share its price, and the dead beast also they shall share. Or if it is known that the ox has been accustomed to gore in the past, and its owner has not kept it in, he shall repay ox for ox, and the dead beast shall be his. All right, thoughts, comments? Pretty standard fare, right?
Seems like it's like giving instructions on what to do. A
Yeah.
lot of people would just be standing around making their own stuff up. But here in verse 22, it seems obvious to everyone because of the law that men strive together.
Yeah.
By you going on in the it's just something that is acknowledged in the law.
Yeah.
There's also laws against that or living.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to use that to introduce this commentary on here. Thought this was good. The laws in this code are very varied, dealing first with persons and then with property. Many of them are repeated and elaborated in the subsequent legislation. Some of them deal with matters of which Paul said it is a shame even to speak. And the necessity of stating them indicates something of the depravity and hardness of heart which the law, as the symbol of the moral government of God, was unable to overcome. Did you catch that? Paul said, "Is it a shame to even speak, and the necessity of stating them indicates something of the depravity and hardness of heart which the law, as the symbol of the moral government of God, was unable to overcome." Romans 8:3. The code deals also with ceremonial and ritual, the Sabbatic year, the annual feast, first fruits, leaven, blood. It closes with the blessed promise that an angel shall guide the people and bring them safely to their destination, and also with a solemn warning against all contamination with the peoples of the land which the Lord will destroy before them. Yes, please.
Okay, it says, "For God has done what the law, weakened by the flesh, could not do, by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin he condemned sin in the flesh."
Mm.
But it's just so good God is a lot, couldn't do. It just breaks my heart to do it.
How much? What was the price of a dead slave?
30 shekels of silver.
Yes. Does that ring any bells?
It was shown at somebody.
Yeah. All right, let's keep rolling.
Well, for the sake of that, asking the question, wasn't that Jews?
Yes. Yeah. That was the blood price given to Judas for Jesus. Verse 22, verse 1. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and kills it or sells it, he shall repay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. 4 sheep, not 4 sheep. Okay. 4 sheep for a sheep. If a thief is found breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there shall be no blood guilt for him. But if the sun has risen on him, there shall be blood guilt for him. He shall surely pay if he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the stolen beast is found alive in his possession, whether it is an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall pay double. All right, you guys catch what's going on there? So if a man steals, he's going to pay 5 to 4 times, depending on what he stole, what he sold. If an owner catches someone breaking in at night in the act of theft, and in the act of defending himself and his property, he kills the man, there is no guilt. The idea is if he sees it during the day, there's less threat. He can clearly see what's going on. He doesn't need to kill the person. If he killed him, he would be guilty of that, is the idea. The implication is he could identify them, then he would go back to the first verse. He's like, that man stole an ox, that man stole a sheep.
There's more implication because at night
Things are dangerous. Right. It's the danger. And if he interrupts a nighttime raid, and in the struggle the thief dies, there is no blood guilt.
Quick illustration. I have a friend, I think he's passed away, but his home, his garage, where he kept all his working things and stuff, was broken into. He didn't know who it was. At night, pitch black, broken into by kids.
Oof.
And he saw one of them in the light in his garage, in the shadow, kind of shadowy light. It looked like he had a gun in his hand, when in fact the guy had a jack. Instead, he was trying to steal, shot him and killed him. So that's why things are so dangerous at night, why penalties are higher for crimes done at night, even today.
Yeah.
And he's delivered that in straight soul, by the way, for killing that boy.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Pronounced innocent of the death because of the circumstances.
The men love the darkness because it hides their evil deeds. If a man causes a field or a vineyard to be grazed over, or lets his beast loose, and it feeds in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the beast in his own field and in his own vineyard. If fire breaks out and catches in thorns, so that the stacked grain or the standing grain or the field is consumed, he who started the fire shall make full restitution. If a man gives to his neighbor money or goods to keep safe, and it is stolen from the man's house, then, if the thief is found, he shall pay double. If the thief is not found, the owner of the house shall come near to God, to show whether or not he has put his hand to his neighbor's property. For every breach of trust, whether it is for an ox, for a donkey, for a sheep, for a cloak, or for any kind of lost thing of which one says, "This is it," the case of both parties shall come before God. The one whom God condemns shall pay double to his neighbor. All right. Thoughts, comments, and or concerns? How does that work? Kick that over to you guys to answer. I'm operating on the assumption that you understand what was said there. Any clarification needed?
I mean, like, nobody knows who done it.
Yeah,
Can't see which one got it,
right. um, I remember once, so I had one child. He went through a brief period where he would lie to me, say, I didn't do it. And I would tell him, well, okay. I actually don't believe you, but I'm going to take it to God and find out, who did it, or if you did it. And the first couple times, he's like, okay, I did it. Then the third time, he was like, well, how do you know? And I was right on the verge of lying to him. And I said, honestly, I don't know because you've always confessed. I said, I don't know how it works, but I'm still going to pray that God will tell me. And then he confessed again. So, how about you guys? What do you think? How they bring it before God?
What do you mean they bring it before God? Is that how you're translating bring it before the judges? I don't know what you said.
Come near to God is what it says in 22:8. Oh, okay. Yeah, so 8 and 9. Come near to God. Oh, good. What do you have?
Chapter 22.
Chapter 22.
If the thief is not caught, then the owner of the house shall appear before the judges to determine whether he laid his hands on the neighbor's property. For every breach of trust, whether it is for ox or donkey, sheep or goat, or anyone lost on which one said, this is it. In case of both parties shall come before the judges. He whom the judges condemn shall pay double to the king.
There you have it.
Is that different than what you guys have?
It is different, but it's the same idea. And what you get is, as we move through the law, you'll see that God will set up the judges and the courts to deal with these cases, to beseech the Lord and find out, and they call it coming before God because they do it in the sanctuary. And the judges who are appointed by God, who are established by God, will make the case. In some cases, they will use, and I always mispronounce these, the two little stones they will use that. Sometimes they'll do just what I said. They will beseech the Lord in prayer and make their best judgment. Sometimes they'll have a divine inspiration like King Solomon and say, well, bring the baby in here, let's cut it in half. So it's not very clearly stated. But as we move through the text, we will see that they set up the courts for this purpose. Yes. Yes.
So do others versions say before God? Or you're saying that the judges?
Every time you're said judges are said God.
Oh, it does.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't make that clear.
The word is out. It's just some translations translate it with an interpretation.
I guess I don't understand. That would be a translational extreme license.
It is, and I think what I found was that they based that translation on the behavior of the courts after the institution of this law. So they went through the scripture and found out when there was a case, it seemed like this is what was done. Looking at Jewish history and looking at the text. But it does seem like a leap. Mickey.
Yeah, because of translation, there are at least two new Bibles that come out year. Really. If
Yeah.
you go down to the list now, you will see, I remember when I was first studying, it was AJ, American Standard, NIV, and maybe a couple others. Now it's just on and on and on. Because of difficulties like this, there are various
Hmm.
people who come together and try to interpret in more correct version.
Well, in the defense, we could come to understand for multiple reasons. Before God is euphemistically used of the process of the judgment.
Yeah.
I think that could be, that's a fair translation of.
Yeah.
If it's true, you know.
All right. Could I get someone? Let's see. Where did I leave off? Could I get someone to read verses 10 through 14?
If a man gives, right?
Yep. Yep.
If a man gives to his neighbor a donkey or an ox or a sheep or any beast to keep safe and it dies or is injured or is driven away without anyone seeing it, an oath by the Lord shall be between them both to see whether or not he has put his hand to his neighbor's property. The owner shall accept the oath and he shall not make restitution. But if it is stolen from him, he shall make restitution to its owner. If it's torn by beasts, let him bring it as evidence. He shall not make restitution for what has been torn. And
If you could read 14 and 15.
if a man borrows anything of his neighbor, and it is injured or dies, the owner not being with it, he shall make full restitution. The owner has with it, was with it, he shall not make restitution. It was hired, it came for its hired indeed. 16.
No, that's good for now.
Okay.
These laws, real quickly, what do you see reflected of God's heart in here? Now, based on your experience with God, what you know of God, based on what we learn from the New Testament, do you see anything of the heart of God here?
See, I mean, as simple as justice, there's a lot
Yep.
of like, when one man's property gets affected another property and something happens, like, I mean, what is one man or another? There's a lot of situational.
Yeah. I also thought of the fact that God does not hold us to the standard that he holds himself to in this law. If we consider ourselves God's property that he is looking after, and if we could carry the analogy further and picture us being torn by a wild beast, a lion maybe roaming, looking for whom he may devour. If Christ subjected himself to this standard, he could just let us get torn, show the proof, I'm not responsible. God does not do that. Christ does not do that. If I were watching Scott's goats and the neighbor's dog tore them to pieces, and I said, I mean, personally, I think all of us would feel terribly responsible, and we'd try to make it right. But technically, if we're going to stand on the law here, if this was Israel, I could say, I'm sorry, Scott, it was torn by beasts, and the judge would say, I'm not responsible. Christ never would never stand on that. He would never let us get torn by beasts. But
I think an important side note real quick.
yeah,
I was just reading a commentary, I think it was yesterday, about how God does not assert himself to a particular standard, he is the standard. So that's something to think about as we consider the law.
Yeah.
So the standard is pretty high.
And it is God. That is awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that. All right, we spent a lot of time there, but I want to read the next couple verses real quick. And again, this really digs into, and As Paul said, it is a shame to even speak of these things, and the necessity of stating them indicates something of the depravity and hardness of heart, which the law is looking to address. Verse 16. If a man seduces a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall give the bride price for her and make her his wife. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money equal to the bride price for virgins. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Whoever lies with an animal shall be put to death. Whoever sacrifices to any god other than the Lord alone shall be devoted to destruction. You shall not wrong a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. You shall not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. If you do mistreat them, and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will burn, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widows, and your children fatherless. If you lend any of my people, if you lend money to any of my peoples with you who is poor, you shall not be like a moneylender to him. You shall not exact interest from him. If ever you take your neighbor's cloak in pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. For that is his only covering, and it is his cloak for his body. In what else shall he sleep? And if he cries to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate. You shall not revile God, nor curse a ruler of your people. I'll stop there. Anything jump out at you guys? Notice the care. I keep stressing this because the charge long laid at the feet of Christianity is that we degrade women, that the law is harsh on women, that's very trendy to revile against the patriarchy and all these things. And obviously this is coming from many people who are not regenerate. They're not Christians. And so, you take it with a bit of grace and understanding that they are not saved, but still look at the care that is also, I wanted to point out with the law of slaves, if a slave is abused, the slave is free. If a man, the implication is just seeking to use a woman, then the implication is that the father is sharp enough to realize that there is a path to free both the slave from an abusive master, to free and restore the woman from a bad man. Yeah, there's a lot of thoughts I have kicking off in my head. Anything you guys want to bring up? We got to close. We're running out of time. And go ahead, Aaron.
It's interesting that the Lord reveals his own compassion there. When he talks about, not taking somebody's cloak or covering.
Yeah.
Cry out, and the same thing with doesn't use the word compassion, but it's the same kind of interaction with the widow and the orphan.
Yeah.
But really, the compassion element can be seen all the way back through. Even the fact that the Lord asks, what do you do if somebody kills your ox? The fact that he cares about that. The other thing, back to the idea of what Paul said of the law, or God has done with the law, reading by the flesh and blood. It's good to keep in mind that the law is answering lots of questions about what do you do when somebody does something bad.
Yes.
And that's, God will answer that in sending Christ by paying for our sin, but also the changed heart and the sanctification leading to ultimate sanctification is the real answer. Because the real problem is we're still doing bad things. God can't stop that. It can provide some equity and some answer for now, but it was never able to obtain the heart.
Yes. And I want to point, go ahead.
I'm bringing up this feedback about what Aaron said. I've been in a fair amount of conversation with somebody who reads a lot of And I'm really interested in that question because historically, I would say God does not seem to aspire to have a political, like, God does not seem to be interested in reinstituting this.
Right.
Now, there's an element in which we would say, clearly this shows what is good and right, regardless.
A view into the heart of God again. Yeah.
Heart of God, how we should interact with each other, but at the same time, historically, like what Aaron's saying, reinstituting this is not the answer to our
No.
problems. So there's just a lot of back and forth in my head, like, not under the law, so it seems like God says, like, this served a time in history that
Yeah.
it's not irrelevant either. Like, so there's, I don't know, I guess you get.
I do. And interestingly on that, and it doesn't really clear it up, but maybe it gives you some fuel for the next couple months before we get back into this. But we were talking about translation earlier. There's a translation difference here between some texts in verse 28. You shall not revile God nor curse a ruler of your people. In some translations, that says, you shall not revile the gods or the ruler of another people. Small g. And that is the same, in those translations, they use the same form of God that's used in the New Testament when they refer to peoples in authority, rulers. And so built into this is this concept, if that translation is correct, built into this is that concept of, here's your rules for you people here now, but as you move out through the world, don't just flippantly revile other people's laws and rulers and authorities. Yeah.
Let's not forget, it doesn't end in that.
Amen.
We have to do it around the wall.
It does. All right, guys, this is exciting, and we will pick up again here. And then Aaron, Acts next week. Right on.